That's what I might do.
It's always easy to change an ordinance.
So is that on the place?
And so,
Thank you.
Or just agree to waive it this time.
So, have we in the past replaced these?
We waited on this project and then we put out a big public notice forward, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. That's kind of like, you know.
I've just had enough elderly folks reach out to me and say that that's how they get to live here,
Oh, yeah.
you know.
Well, that way they don't have to walk in the grass.
Of course, in the olden days, you know, courtesy sidewalk.
We did 8th Street
Visitor
at
parked
one
on the
house,
street and then
and
You
it
have to
settled.
have a carriage down at
And
the
so there was a
sidewalk.
that's right.
height at the curb. And the city came back in and fixed it, but only with me pushing.
We're going to call tonight's meeting to order. Thank you, everyone, for coming to the Muscatine City Council in-depth meeting. Cinda, will you please do the roll call?
Councilmember Spread,
Present.
Harvey,
Present.
Rockert,
Present.
Macedo,
Present.
Brackett,
Present.
Fitzgerald,
Present.
Malcolm,
Present.
7 present, 0 absent.
Thank you, Cinda. Tonight is what we call an in-depth meeting, which means we'll be having some presentations. We're going to move right into that and dispense with any formalities tonight. Jim, will you please talk to us about courtesy sidewalks?
Excuse me.
All right. Courtesy sidewalks. I dropped a couple of a plan off that looks something like this. It's got some highlighted. What's highlighted on there are actually the courtesy walks themselves. The public sidewalk is between where that courtesy sidewalk is and the house, as it shows, the little outline of the house. If there's any questions, comments, or concerns about that, I guess I would like to make sure you guys understand exactly where these are at. So, has everybody got that picture? We're all on the same page. Good, excellent. The other one is a single page out of the city's sidewalk policy. And that sidewalk policy was adopted, as best as I can tell, in May of 2015.
Probably.
I think, is when it was adopted. I don't know for sure. I think that's pretty darn close. So when we were in the middle of phase 3, which was a 3-year contract, right in the middle of the first year is when that sidewalk policy was enacted. So we didn't really cue into that at all. So in phase 3, for the last 3 years, whenever we've run into a situation like this, we have put them back. Wherever we did sidewalk programs and put sidewalks in, we put them back. So we felt that it was important, because since we discovered we were breaking the rules as established and as approved by City Council, that we should cease doing it. So phase 4, which is for the next 3 years, and has courtesy walks in it, similar to that plan. That plan you have in front of you is from phase 4 for the first year, because I think it's along 7th Street, yes. It kind of gives you an idea how many there are in a block. And one of the things that I think is really important for you to realize is that we have tried fairly hard to get to the why behind that sidewalk policy. And I don't, I mean, this is just information that I have gathered, but the information that we have is that there's a lot of communities that have that same exact policy. And the reason they have that same exact policy is they feel that those courtesy walks tend to lead people to walk down them and cross mid-block, which is probably not the best and probably not the safest. It is also felt that cities feel that a sidewalk like that leads to them is just another place for someone to step off of a curb or miss a step or anything else and, roll an ankle or fall down or anything. I mean, especially when you think about the elderly population. And so they are definitely out of fashion, so to speak, but it is entirely up to this group as to whether you would want to put them back or not. I'm just bringing to you the information as to where we are headed now and the logic that we have behind why we would see them as something that we don't want to do. Other thing that's involved is even if we put those in, even if we were to put those in, it is still the homeowner's responsibility to shovel it, exactly, which isn't a big deal with snow, but if anything were to go wrong with it, we would come along and inspect it eventually and tell them they have to replace it. So it's also can be viewed as an additional liability to the property owner. I would guess a lot of the property owners see it as a plus, not a liability. So with that information, I would open it up to any questions that you guys have about it or concerns or comments. I had one individual call, because we did in the information we put out in the letters and in the door hangers that we put out, we did specifically call out that we are not replacing those courtesy walks. We wanted to be as upfront, open, honest, transparent as possible with that whole thing. And the one gentleman called, he said, well, you've done it in the past. And so I kind of explained exactly what I just explained to you guys. And his response was, well, you wrote the code. It's just as easy for you to unwrite the code or to change the code. And then I did talk to another lady who called about it because she just didn't know what the definition of a courtesy walk was. So I explained it to her. Oh, is that what it is? Never mind. I really don't care. So I've only got 2 votes is all I've heard about. So with that, if there's any other information you wish or desire.
How did you discover it?
I do the sidewalk program every year. So occasionally I have cause to read that sidewalk policy. And it's not in a very good place. It's code, but it's written into the definition. So it's easy to miss. And it's just something I happened upon, and when I read it, I reread it and then reread it again and said, wow. I guess
but you think it started in 2015, this definition added into the code?
Yes, I think this policy was adopted by the council
In its
May
entirety.
of 2015.
So this was just a small piece of that?
Yes, this is just a page of definitions. This is just the piece that shows you where that requirement is. It's 20, well, I have it here.
But really, it's not just definitions. It actually is stating something, not just what a courtesy walk is.
But I mean, the section that it's under is definitions for that.
But yet it's actually making a statement, not
So
just defining it.
If you write a policy, you write a code, a definition should be a definition, and the code requirement should be
In the
stuck
code,
in the code.
exactly.
Yeah. So it's
Jim, just to be clear though, it's a policy, not a code.
right. It's a policy, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And the existing sidewalk policy is 22 pages long, and it has a lot of stuff in it about ADA accessibility, what the ramps should look like, how they should be built, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm definitely not criticizing it, but I'm trying to make sure we get where we need to get.
I had a question on it.
Go ahead.
So, so if it's not a code, it's a policy. And my biggest concern with putting them back in would only be around any requirements we would have as far as what you just mentioned, ADA requirements. Does that apply to these in any way, shape, or form?
My understanding of those courtesy walks is they do not have to meet ADA requirements. They can come right out to the back of curb, and you can have a 6-inch drop right there. Okay. Because you have ADA accessibility on each end of the block where those ramps are already built in. So you have that quote-unquote alternative.
Okay, because I've received a decent amount of feedback on this that's all been in favor or neutral. You know, I had a couple people that had told me, yeah, you know, if it stays, it stays. If it goes, it goes. They weren't really worried about it. But I had a few people reach out that were had mobility issues and used those because they don't have off-street parking, and they use those to get to their vehicles. And so they had concerns there. And so my thought process on it would be more along the lines of giving an option to the homeowner as to whether or not, you know, if they don't want it, then don't put it back. But, you know.
Yes, I understand that. We just had well, you guys know that. You two know that.
Right.
We just had the public information meeting for Phase 4. And one of the things that resident in that area said is what do we go? Is it okay if I want to put it back? And honestly, I'm not even sure what the answer to that is, but I think the answer to that is I don't think the city would care. We just don't want, or at least at this point in time, the idea is that we don't want to put it back because of the liability associated with it, and it directs people into mid-block crossings.
Right. I mean, the way the definition's written, though, on here would indicate that if a resident put it in themselves, that we would potentially go and remove it and, cite them and ask them to remove it or something along those, because it does say that new courtesy walk construction is prohibited.
Yes.
So
my interpretation of that is prohibited by the city. And the crazy thing about this sidewalk policy, not that I wrote it, remember now, that's all remember, I didn't write this. But the last page of it gives the city engineer total discretion as to whether it is followed or not.
okay.
Something I think maybe should be you all's responsibility, not mine, but it does say that. So
Gotcha.
Well, I'm of the belief that if something put in the right of way, we had an issue with that a few years ago, and there is a process that is identified that if you want to put something in the right of way, you need to come to City Hall, tell us what you're going to do. It gets reviewed, whether it's going to cause traffic issues or whatever, and then you have permission to put it in, or you don't. In this situation, these are existing, and my feeling is that policy needs to be altered, that if it's in there and they still want it, let's put it back. If they want something custom, no, it's going to be concrete. It's going to be whatever width it was that we took out.
yep.
And if they don't, if they have one but they don't want it put back, then we won't put it back, but we're not going to come back 6 months later and put one in then when you decided you changed your mind.
Yep.
I'd agree with that.
So that's
Okay.
I think it's an easy fix. Just
That makes
I agree.
sense.
I think if it's a public works project and we took it out in pursuit of that project, maybe we ought to replace it. But I'll use my own home as an example. There's been no courtesy there since 1904. Can I put one in or not? This appears to say no.
Yeah, well, that's what I think you should be able to but the city isn't going to do it.
Right. Oh, I understand that.
I do also think that one of the things that maybe that needs to address a little better is the fact that where we're working with the sewer separation project right now is downtown, older section of town, where that was a lot different. That was very common back in those days to do it. And a newer section of town or a new subdivision that would come in, obviously you wouldn't do something like that. Yeah. So, okay. So in essence, the general consensus is that we're going to do it.
Yeah.
If they
I
want
saw a few heads nod. I guess I'm
Yes.
looking for their...
I mean, you're already there, they're mobilized. The cost for a homeowner to try to do this later is not gonna be feasible. I mean, they're gonna already sod the grass, they're probably gonna have to fix all the stuff, pour the concrete, it's already all there. I mean, if they want it, I think it would be the best option, just like what Phil said. I agree with that, and it's a good idea. If they don't want it, then that way they can take it out.
Very good. Thank you.
I don't think it would hurt to clean, if there's a way to clean this up too, since that's the only one that seems to have an actual directive in the definition, and I think that's probably why it was missed.
But that's up to us, not him.
I understand.
Yes.
So I have a quick question though.
Fire away.
How do we know which ones want it and don't want it? Is there a way, what mechanism or vehicle we're using to establish, yes, I want this, or no, I don't want this?
During the course of
one?
construction in there, we visit with almost, I'm going to say every homeowner, but let's just hedge our bet and say almost every homeowner. So our assumption will be, if it's there, we put it back. If we talk to them and they express a desire that they don't want it back, and I would think it would have to be that explicitly we don't want it, not that, hey, I don't care or something like that, then we wouldn't put it back. I'll give you 100 to 1 odds that doesn't happen. I think we'll put them all back, is what I'm saying.
Okay.
And if they want it removed, you might have a little piece of paper there that says, please sign.
Yeah.
If they
good
don't
Yeah,
want it.
yeah, I'd agree with that too.
Sign it and date it. It will be removed and we are not installing.
Putting it back, yep. All right, very good.
Anybody else have any other comments?
Questions?
Councilman?
You just have to distinguish it, whether it's the property owner or a renter, for instance, making those decisions.
Yes, that's always a challenge.
Anyone else? Thank you, Jim. We
right.
appreciate it. Next, we're going to have Brian Steinman come up and talk about flood preparation. Council, as we're having these discussions, I'd like to remind you to please lean forward and speak directly into your microphone. The folks at home are really struggling to hear. Go ahead.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I just wanted to briefly, it's becoming to be flood season. Hopefully it won't be, but just kind of wanted to give an overview of what the Public Works Department does to prepare for floods, kind of give you some ideas of the action levels and what you may see during flood events and how the community can gain some information as well. So just briefly, this is the projection for this year. It's based on it's kind of like a probability type of odds thing. So the darker the blue, the higher the probability. If you can see, my handy dandy pointer works here. We're right about here today. And so we're about 90% probability of getting about 10 feet flood and about a 10 to 25% chance of getting a 20-foot flood on today. So I think we're in good shape today. And that goes down as we go far. Now, this is all subject to change, obviously, based on weather patterns and things like that. But so this is kind of how we start our season, is looking at these projections and seeing, where we have to prepare and what we have to prepare for. So what I use is the National Weather Service website, and there's the link right there, and I'll make this PowerPoint available to everybody as well. We can put this on our website as well if anybody wants to link to that. But the link is very helpful. It shows what's called stream hydrographs. And so this is what, if you click on that link, this will take you to the page, and all those green dots are stream gauges throughout the system that the Corps of Engineers operates. Muscatine's right here. There's 2 gauges. There's one at the Lock and Dam, and there's one down by GPC. We monitor the GPC one more closely because that's the pool elevation that we're on. The other one actually measures the pool above. So if you click on on the dots, it'll take you to a hydrograph, which is what looks like this, and I've zoomed it in a little bit so you can see. So today at 1:15, we were at about 8.6 feet, and this is projected out through the week about April 19th. So we can get about a week's worth of notice based on upstream weather data and stream gauge data that the Corps puts together. These are updated twice a day, I believe, maybe even 3 times a day. And so they're very handy for us. If you see a big spike, we know we've got rain coming. And we also are able to monitor all the gauges upstream as well. So we can monitor, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Davenport, and see the peak coming. So it's a very useful tool for us.
Brian, where did you say we can get to this link at?
This is if you go to this link here,
Yeah.
it takes you to this page, and you click on the dot that you want.
Oh, okay.
So Muscatine, Davenport. There's stream gauges. There's Mississippi gauges. There's all the gauges that are in Iowa, Illinois. They're all available, and each one, when you click on it, pops up a graph like that.
Okay.
So you can check any gauge that you would like to. I just zoomed this in so you can see it a little bit better on this. So our action levels and observations that we typically are based on, like I said before, we base all of our actions on the river gauge that's near GPC. Those red dots show you the gauges. Like I said, the one upstream is at the Lock and Dam. The other one is at the lower dot down by GPC. And what I'm going to show you here is mostly affects the downtown area by the riverfront. So at 9 feet, our official flood stage here is 16 feet. So we do have a few activities that we do at lower levels. At 9 feet, we want to make sure that we close the gravity outfall so that we don't get water backing up into the storm sewer Mad Creek. Excuse me. We verify that we've got our gates closed at the Hershey lift station at 11 feet. At 14 feet, we start to see water at the boat access there that the old paddle wheel boat was. I believe that's Meeker's Access, or what it's called, Meeker's Access in our book anyway. And then at 15 feet, we start to get water over the sidewalk to the transient docks. So things happen before we hit official flood stage, but nothing, super drastic. So like I said, 16 feet is our official flood stage. At 16 feet, we see water on the sidewalk on the west side of the clamor statue, and it's at the edge of the drive for the boat launch area. Let's see. So if it goes any higher than that, then we start to lose our parking spaces on the riverfront, and at 19.5 feet, we lose all the parking on the riverfront. That's coming up later as well. At 17 feet, things start to affect us a little bit more. We start to get backups through the storm drains. This is still on the riverside. It gets over the harbor wall, starts to creep onto the sidewalk at the harbor, and it gets to the top step. There is a gauge that's down there by the Riverview Center. If you've seen that on the steps, so there's an older gauge there. It's not an official gauge anymore, but we still use that to kind of quantify some of our numbers, and so that's just an idea of, the top step there is where that water is at 17 feet. At 17.2 feet, we get water coming through the inlets on the riverfront. So that's where we know when we see that, we're going to start getting our stuff put out for road closures. I should have a disclaimer here, and I will add the disclaimer that some of these things are going to change with the construction of Mississippi Drive. So some of those elevations will change, and you'll see that here in a little bit longer. So we may have some different options at our next flood fight when the street is completed. At 17.5 feet, we start to get water on the at the Pearl City Station. We get water out of the catch basins by the anchor sculpture thing, or if it's a real anchor, by the anchor. The pier that goes out there becomes underwater at that point, and we start getting water on more sidewalks by that Pearl City Station, and we start to get seep water down by the skate park as well. It starts to come up, groundwater comes up the other side of the levee. So at 18 feet, we get water by the stone bench that covers the parking lot from Riverview to Papoose. The breakwater, you'll notice if we had an 18-footer last year, you'll see some of the rocks disappear on the breakwater out there at the harbor. And then at 18, if we know we're going to have 18 feet, we start to make sandbags if we don't have enough on hand. We try to keep as many as we need. We do give out sandbags throughout the course of the year for different reasons, so we'll actually be making some sandbags starting next week just to make sure we have enough on hand. At 18.2, we get a little action on the street, and we have in the past anyway, and it starts to come out of the storm sewer inlet at Walnut Street. This is going to change after Mississippi Drive is constructed. We've raised the elevation there. So at this point, we haven't confirmed this yet, but we think we're going to be able to get through a flood of about 20 feet without having the water come out of that catch basin because the elevation changed, which will be great. That'll buy us a lot longer time before we have to close the road. And at 18.2, if the river is still rising based on the hydrographs, we know we're going to have to start phasing out the parking on the riverfront parking lot. At 18.3, now we're going in small steps here, a tenth of an inch or a tenth of a foot, I'm sorry. So it's creeping, but sometimes the river goes that much, sometimes it doesn't. It'll just hang at 18.2 for a while. So they're smaller steps, but the actions still have to happen. This is what we've observed through time with repetitive floods and measurements during the flood. So we start to get water at the river center in the bottom level in the basement there. We get water up the rivers, up Iowa, or on Mississippi Drive at Iowa. And this is another one we're going to have to check on this year and see if that actually happens with the grade changes and things on Mississippi Drive. We get water on the sidewalks by the fountain. The houseboat dock is as high as it'll go. And then we got some water coming out of the drains by Pearl City Station. So at this point, we're just kind of backing up, and we're monitoring this constantly. If it goes bigger than that, 19 feet, then in the past, that's where we have to close Mississippi Drive because we can no longer get around that wet spot. As I said before, I think this year, or hopefully not this year, but next flood, when the river's done, hopefully we'll be able to make this last till about 19.5. At 19, well, it's coming up here. So we lose our parking lot at 19.5 at Riverfront, and we get water at Walnut, and that'll be determined after the road's done. So hopefully we can keep that open past that elevation. At 19.64, we have water to the Mississippi Drive center line at Mulberry. We'll have to see again about that one. At 19.8, we get the Pearl City Station is covered, and the deck there is covered at the mist. We get water out of the catch basins, and then we start to monitor things really closely at that point, because if we're at a 19-foot flood or higher, any rainfall events that affect Mad Creek, we have no capacity in Mad Creek. So we're looking at a straight overflow event down to H&I. So we have to be very vigilant at that point to make sure that we can get in there, if we're expecting a thunderstorm or whatever, to get that gate closed so that we don't flood that out. So 19 plus, we're on higher alert. And then we also have to notify the CP Rail and Hines if we have to close that. We have a floodgate on the spur there as well, and if we have to close that, we need to let them know in advance so they can get their shipments in, because they might not get any for a while depending on when the flood would recede. 20 plus, things get interesting. That's the point where we close the flood structure at Mississippi Drive. That's down there by the two houses where Mississippi Drive turns to go up Mulberry. There's a floodgate there that we close. We alert the DOT because if for some reason we have to close the Second Street closure, that's 92 route, so we have to let them know that we're going to close that. We start to get more seepage, different areas, and then at 20.3, then we have to close that flood structure, and that is dependent on future or forecast as well. We may close that sooner if we think we need to, so we just have that in there as past experience. At 20.34, the park is completely underwater. There's water in the station. We have to close the gate well at Mississippi Drive and Sycamore, otherwise we'll get water coming up out of the storm sewer there. So going higher than 20 feet, at 21 feet, we're pretty much buttoned up to where we need to be, where we can't do a whole lot more other than wait and watch and maintain vigilance and make sure that if we have any sand boils or any leaks that we get them sandbagged or pumped, and we go in to monitor these things at 24 hours a day at that point. If it goes to 24 feet, that's where we get water in front of the steps at the old hotel on Mississippi Drive. 26 feet, we're closing off the main line of the railroad at the gate that's down there by Broadway on the railroad tracks. And 27 feet is the top of our flood wall. So I hope I'm never here if we get that high. I think we probably all hope we're never here. The record flood is 25.5 or 25.6 feet. 27 feet, I think that's built at the 500-foot elevation with 2 foot of freeboard. So you hope that you never, if you have waves on the river or whatever, you have some space in there. If it tops that flood wall at 27 feet, we'll do everything we can to protect the city, but there may be an event where that's just, we're flooded at that point. So that's pretty much briefly going through that. I did throw some maps in here, just kind of show the elevations. This is a 16-foot, and these are based on contours. These aren't based on actual GIS observations from where the water went at these elevations. And I'll kind of go through it kind of slow. You can kind of see the water creep up here. I'm at 20 feet right there, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. What I want to point out on this doesn't mean that all those buildings are underwater. There might be an inch of water on the pavement at that spot. I mean, it looks bad on the GIS map because you can't really show it another way. But that's based on the contour elevations. Those are some of the inundation levels that we would see at 25 feet. And we don't see it like that because we have the levee and things like that. But just to kind of give an impression of what that could look like. That's at 20, that's 26, and that's my last slide. So are there any questions at this point?
Brian,
Yep.
at Mulberry and Mississippi Drive, that corner there,
Yes.
is that going to be, when we're all done, is that going to be at a higher elevation, or is that elevation going to?
I don't have that plan memorized off the top of my head. I think it's going to be almost the same, if not the same, at that point.
Because if it raised, then it caused problem for the upstream.
It's raised at Walnut, and so what happened in the past, I'm told, is that it would get to Walnut and it would fill up and then it would spill over and go back towards Cedar, Iowa, Cedar, and now that's higher, so it doesn't go downstream. It's going to probably just pool at Walnut is what will happen, and at Sycamore, and that'll be a determination that we'll have to make at Public Works is, should we pump it? Where do we pump it to? If it gets that high, it's something that we're discussing now, so we have a plan in place. But until it's constructed, we really can't modify our flood plan. That's our plan. That's my goal for this coming winter season, is that we get the road constructed, we get as-built shots, we have all those elevations, and we can redo our flood. Our flood plan is a few years old. It needs to be updated, and we'll do that in the coming winter months after construction's over. But I just kind of wanted to give you just a high-level overview of what we do and what happens at certain elevations.
At 27 feet, you said we closed the railroad floodgate?
26 feet.
26 feet.
Yep.
We do that, not Canadian Pacific?
We do it. We notify them.
And do we know at what point in time the railroad quits using the tracks?
You know that, Randy? 22 feet.
2.
So there's time in there we could get in there sooner, and it just depends on You know, if they're off the tracks and we think it's going to come up farther, we'll go down and shut it because we can get in there easier. It's all based on those projections though too. If it looks like the crest is going to drop, then we don't have to do those steps. So that's why we monitor those hydrographs daily and hourly sometimes.
Brian, in years past, I remember down near Musser Park, there was enough, I'd call it, I guess it was levee seepage there that it almost was running across Oregon Street. As I recall, back in those days, they pumped it, but I don't know where they were pumping it to, unless they were just trying to pump it back up across the levee.
I don't know for sure.
They would actually take and pump that seepage water, but actually they pump it down to the water treatment plant through a manhole, which we just put that new line in or that liner in.
Yeah.
So that's where it gets pumped to. It actually goes down over there.
Do you recall at what flood stage you can't keep Oregon Street open anymore?
We've never ever had to close Oregon.
You never have, okay.
Not in my 36 years.
Any other questions for Brian?
Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate it. Last on our agenda tonight, Dave Gobin's going to share with us some information on the building division.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. What are you smiling about, Greg? Let's see if I can get this up quickly. One of the things we're, oops, wrong file. Yeah. Oh, you sure? Oh, that's cool. One of the things that the city administrator asked us to do, and I think it's been incumbent on us as a community development department, is to give you and the public a fairly large overview of what the building division, which is one that gives you building permits and such, to provide service to our citizens, our community in general. And what I did was we assembled a small team. And I want to introduce to some of you that don't know him, my predecessor of 37 years, I guess, before I was here, Steve Boca. He's going to give you a rendition of where the codes came from and why we adopted them and how we use them. And what I'll do is also take it from there, and I'm going to introduce you to Mike Stensland, who's our certified building inspector, certified building official for the city. And then I'll finish up with, basic examples and results. So with that, I'm going to introduce you to Steve Boca, and hopefully.
Thank you. Just a very brief history. Codes were established mostly locally across the country in the early 1900s, in the late 1800s. There was really no concerted effort to put together comprehensive building codes until 1927, when the Uniform Building Code was first promulgated, or developed is another term for that, in California. Subsequent to that, there were two other national consensus codes that were adopted, one for the Southern Building Code, which is SBCCI, Southern Building Code, Congress International, and the third region was used the BOCA Code, which is BOCA, Building Official Code Administrators International. So you had essentially three publications nationally that grew into international model codes to be used in the country. One in the East Coast, one in the Southeast, and the other one generally west of the Mississippi. And they cooperated, attended each other's meetings annually, worked together on code development and education and the other things. In 1994, there was a concerted effort made to consolidate even those into one model code group that could have a true representation for the entire country. That group was called the ICC, or the International Code Council, and it was primarily made up of those 3 model code groups, who frankly had a lot of the same code requirements in their codes, but they had to be reconciled with the numbering sequence, and there were some other things brought into it. That lasted a little longer than anticipated, but finally in the year 2000, the first international code, the International Building Code and the family of codes, was made available for publication. That is the one that the city of Muscatine has adopted. Prior to that time, and prior to my tenure actually, it's hard to believe, but prior to that time, in the very early 70s and late 60s, the city adopted the Uniform Building Code, which is the one that the ICBO code, or the ones that were the model code west of the Mississippi and geographically covered most of the country. Now we have the same thing in Muscatine that is used in, frankly, all 50 states in the country, most jurisdictions. There are local amendments to that, but several of the states, the majority of the states, have adopted it as a statewide building code. So I don't want a perception that this is a local code that we've taken the time and effort to do as a local consideration. It's a broad-based consensus code used nationwide, and actually it's used in a number of countries, including Mexico, Canada, Australia, most of the Caribbean countries, and other countries international, so hence the term international. One of the things with the consensus code that I think helped was that if you are a person, pick a place in the country or another country, that is looking to develop or move or invest in a community or a state, one of the first things you're going to want to know as a developer is, or business, is what kind of regulations do we have there, what are we dealing with? It's nice for the designer, the design professional, the engineer, the architect, the developer, to be able to call, and they do frequently, touch base with the building department, say, gee, what do you guys use for codes? Well, we use this version of the IBC. Fantastic, okay? Do you have any local amendments? Yes, no, can we get those? They have the framework to begin a complete analysis on the code of what they need to submit to the city for permits. Most of those agencies appreciate that because they realize it helps them. It puts everybody in a level playing field. They're familiar with it. They can access it on the internet. It's free for use. I've always said and maintained we're a phone call away. If you have questions, pick up the phone, call us. That's why we're here. That's a part of what we do. And so I think it's really been a beneficial, a big benefit to folks, designers, professionals, and users that are looking to invest elsewhere in the country. I think we want to promote ourselves as being willing to work with folks when they come to the community, want to invest in the community. One of the ways we can do that is offer them a standard that's a national standard that isn't difficult to understand, or that they can't go back to their own offices and probably have a copy of on their desk if they're in that business. So that opens the gates, and we've had very good cooperation over my tenure with working with outside businesses and industries that we're looking to invest in the community, not solely based, but in large part based on our use of those national models for building codes. So that's kind of how we got to where we are. They are under continual review because the technology changes. The codes change for reasons that make a lot of sense. I think the earlier documents were all prescriptive codes, and that meant that if you did this, you did that. You didn't have a choice. This is what you had to do. And that's shifted more now, based on technology and other things, experience, to performance-based codes, meaning that if you're going to build this high and have this many floors, and you're going to be this close to adjacent uses, and depending on what the hazardous uses are there, et cetera, you can build a building of this size provided you do these certain things. That means, how far are you away from those buildings? Do you build firewalls? Are you protected against those? Are your height limitations exceeding the requirements for that type of use or occupancy? All of those things are factored into that. And of course, this runs between residential all the way to industrial. So there's, as you might expect, there is a number of different codes, there's a number of different disciplines, and there's a number of regulations that the city must adhere to. I think I've always used, and I believe it's something I advocate, is that everybody talks about inspections and enforcement. I always looked at that. I always try to sell a city on, these are services. These are inspection services. They're plan review services. They're done for that purpose. If you use the service, you pay a fee. If you need the inspections, if you need the plan review, you pay a fee to pay for those services. That's those people going out to provide that service. So that the general taxpayer has a minimum liability supporting it. If you use the system, if you have to have a permit because you need to have those inspection services, you pay a portion of that. So if you don't use it, you don't pay that fee. The other thing I think that happened with this is, with these consensus documents, is it gave an opportunity for a nationwide educational program that educates interested persons in these disciplines, code services, code enforcement services, et cetera. And there are degrees offered in building sciences, and they're one of the supporters of these. So large industries support this. Boeing is one you're all familiar with, is a big supporter of the international codes. So it is not just local, it is adopted locally. Actually, this is the state of Iowa's building code as well. If you call them, this is the same code they adopt. So if the state is doing something with universities, or they're doing something with the hospitals or whatever that the state has purview over, they use the same codes we do. So I think that's just good background information for everybody to understand when we're moving forward. The other thing I think happened is it helped, there was a code ethics developed with this and the adoption of the code, and the people that are using the code are to adhere to that code of ethics. But it did provide for a series of certifications, and these are national certifications. They are issued only following successful completion of a proctored examination, generally lasted 2 to 4 hours, and it covers the code requirements to determine people's competency in these various disciplines. So with that, I want to touch on what I think is absolutely fantastic for a community our side, and that's the folks you have that work for you in that division. And I think what I want to point out here is that if you look at this at your convenience, you'll find that you have over 80 years of experience of certified people, 80 years of inspection services and plan review services personnel working here. We have one that's the newest one that most recently has been employed by the city, now has got his residential and commercial electrical inspector, and I'd like to comment on that just for a minute, because under the old code you took a competency certification examination for plans review, or you took it for building inspection or plumbing inspection. Now, because of the complexities and the technology involved in these disciplines, they've broken that out to residential and commercial, or non-residential, which is commercial and industrial. So if you look at that, you'll see that, for example, the first one has a residential and commercial electrical inspection. That's not only required by the state of Iowa, but it's required for him to make inspections in commercial or industrial facilities as well. And you have to have that, or it has to be somebody that was employed before the state of Iowa required this certification as well. But it's based on this national one. So we're covered there. If you didn't have that, the state would be making your inspections here, and you'd be paying the state of Iowa to provide those, but they would have to be done, okay? If you drop down, Mike Hopkins is an interesting gentleman that kind of fell in our lap. Mike is retired from his experience in California, where Mike you see in front of you, he's had 37 years of experience. Interestingly enough, which isn't on this particular screen, Mike was certified by the state of California as an inspector for large hospitals and large schools. And they had that in 3 different levels on both, for whether it was, you know, like, for example, a school would be not more than 1 story and less than $10 million, and the next level would be 4 or 5 stories covered so many square feet, not less than $40 million, or not more than $40 million. And the other one was high-rise, which schools, which, you know, came about as cities became tighter and tighter, and the vertical environment became more popular. He is certified in all of those. For 37 years, he's conducted that. City of Ventura, California, outside of LA, he's worked in a lot of those. He's a part-time inspector for you folks that works upstairs, and he's got that level of experience. So he was helpful working with H&I's expansion. I think he was very helpful and knowledgeable when it came to working with the new hotel that was just constructed. Anyway, Mike works half days. I don't think he wants to work full days. He did that. He had a job. He came back here in his retirement, and he's been working with the city now, doing just a fantastic job. Very knowledgeable. The last person on there is Mike Stensland, and he's the person that's going to follow me when we're done here. And Mike kind of fell into the city's lap. He moved back because he had family in the Muscatine area, and he moved back to be closer to his grandkids. But Mike he's an Iowa-born and raised individual, lived in Humboldt, went through the school system there, moved out west when the building boom was taking place, and worked in the Denver metropolitan area and the mountain regions of Colorado for a number of years, obtained and was a building official in a number of different communities out in the Denver area or the state of Colorado. But you'll see he has where it says building inspector or plumbing inspector. His were predated before this changeover to commercial and residential, but his was based on that broad sweep of things. So he has to keep his credentials up. He has to keep his CEUs up. He has a continuing education and the other things. But he is competent in all those disciplines from both the residential and non-residential side. He's certified, nationally certified to work anywhere in those areas. The first two I think are particularly important in my judgment because he's a certified building official. Nationwide, there are 64,000 people that are involved in the code development process, just so you get an idea how big this effort is nationally. In the state of Iowa, there are 36 certified building officials, only 36. Some of those are architects and engineers, are not employed by either cities or counties. You have one here. That's a big deal. They're not easy to get. They're hard to get because when you certify for a building official, you certify in all those disciplines that he has listed there, in addition to human resources, legal, code development, all the other issues that come with that. But then on the plans examiner, which is the next one, there are 86 of those in the state of Iowa. And the difference with those is the plans examiner, you might be a plans examiner for accessibility, and you'll see he has that down there. You might be a plans examiner for fire inspector. Mike is competent in all those disciplines. He's been certified nationally to do this. He could work in any community in the country. So we lucked out on that. We worked out well. It worked out well that Mike wanted to come home. We were glad to have him, and he's done a fine job. So the last thing I have that I wanted to share with you is I'll beat Mike's chest because I don't think he'll do that on his own. But the city of Muscatine received an achievement in 2013, and that achievement was for having the department 100% certified. Everybody in the department was certified in their jobs. And Mike took that upon himself to work with even the office, I call it the clerk, but we got our permit technician certification. So he submitted on behalf of the city for this national award. The city of Muscatine was not only the first city in the state of Iowa for population under 50,000, but nationally to receive this award. So we got a national award. He went to the national conference. They received the award, had his picture taken, rightfully earned, and so that was a big feather in our cap. So anyway, this is where we are with certification. This is the kind of folks you have working for you. This is their experience and how we got the codes. If I can fill any gaps, if anybody has any questions I can answer, I'll certainly try to do that. Otherwise, I'll pass the torch and we'll continue the,
Thank you.
okay.
One question, Steve.
Yeah.
There's things like the National Electric Code, are they folded into this building code, so to speak?
You pick the one that's not. The National Electric Code is actually promulgated by the National Fire Association, NFA, but they are a companion document with this. When you adopt the codes here, you adopt the National Fire Code, or the National Electric Code, rather, the National Electric Code.
So it's applied nationwide also?
It is. It's just, yep, and it's a companion document to these documents.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just wanted to call your attention to a package of information I provided you. The first page is the
You scare us to death.
okay, make sure the camera's on him too.
Awake.
The first page will look like this. The printed out on you so you can read it. Can't read it too well on there. It's a flow chart, basically explaining the permitting process. I wanted to clarify for Councilor Allen that, or Councilor Harvey, I'm sorry, that the NECs we've adopted by code, and the most recent one is NEC 17, so it's 2017 version. The IBC 2015 is the most current version we've adopted for the building codes. I believe that's coming out with a new set probably in another year or so, 2018's. Yeah, that's the possibility that they come out every 3 or so years to give you some sense of where we are on those codes that we're looking at. And of course, then we make local amendments to them, such as whether, and the last one we did was no fire sprinklers in homes, for example. We didn't want to require that. So that gives you an example of what that is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call up Mike Stenzlin, our certified building official, and a guy I rely on a lot every day, Mike Stenzlin, to go over the next few slides to give you an example. He'll go through this permitting plot process and
Good evening. My name is Michael Stenzlin. I haven't had the opportunity to address council since I've been here, so it's great.
Thank you for coming.
See you guys. I will be brief. I know it's not a interesting subject, but I will attempt to explain our permitting process that we're currently under here in Muscatine. Having done this for 30-some years, counting contracting 40, but I have worked for various jurisdictions, and this is pretty common. So there's nothing out of the ordinary with Muscatine. The purpose for building permits, plan reviews, and inspections is to assure the public that we have a certain level of safety in our buildings for the occupants. It's also beneficial to the owners in that it adds value to their buildings, and as well as insurance benefits there. What happens in Muscatine is when permit applications and plans are received in the building department, a determination is made as to whether or not we need to do a plan review. We do need to do plan reviews whenever there's a new building that's put up or an addition to an existing building. Anytime there's a significant change to or remodeling, that type of thing. And the other thing a lot of people aren't aware of, whenever there's a change of use to an existing building. Example would be if an office is converted into a restaurant or a house into an office type of thing. We need to make sure the code requirements are different, and we just need to make sure that we address those. The types of things we look for in a plan review are the zoning, just to make sure that the use is approved for what they are proposing. The setbacks meet the minimum codes, fire ratings of exterior walls, interior walls, structural changes, whether or not fire sprinklers are required, fire alarms, exiting systems. We need to check that, whether or not we're in a floodplain, emergency escape rescue openings, which I'm going to talk about in just a moment here, accessibility for the disabled, making sure that those are in place, the barriers are not there, smoke alarms, carbon monoxide alarms, radon protection, which applies to houses, and kitchen hood exhaust systems. What happens with the flow with the permits, back to our chart there, if it's determined that a plan review is not necessary, this would be for roofing, siding, sheds, minor type projects, then it goes straight to the matter of issuing the permit, the payment of fees. Most cases we can do this over the counter, so people don't have to wait, make a return trip. We try to keep things rolling as best we can as part of our service. And then into the inspection phase, which I'll get into in a moment. When plan reviews are necessary, it's assigned to a staff. Usually I get most of them because I'm in the office the most. However, when I get overloaded, the others can help me out. Assuming that everything is in place that I just discussed, that the plans are included with all that, including everything there, and they're approved, then as you can see it moves down to the payment of fees. We contact the applicant, that's taken care of, the building permit is issued, and it moves into the inspection portion. If it's not approved, there's two different paths. I'm showing corrections here, but more than likely we'll issue what we call permit conditions. We'll identify the problems with the plans, go ahead and issue the permit, trying to keep things moving for people because time is pretty critical, and then we can go ahead and approve it, move on to the issuance of the permit. Let's see. Some of the things I've seen, just to give you an idea of the benefits of the plan review, things we've observed and had corrected. Obviously, we want to have things resolved before you get into the construction stages. It gets pretty expensive for people if they start construction and we ask them to move things. So some of the items that I've seen, and these are even since being in Muscatine, if I mentioned all of them through my career, it'd be countless. There's several of them on my page. I'm just going to mention about 3 or 4 of them. One in particular was, and this is fairly recent, the exterior wall of a new building was fairly close to the property line. The thing we have to be careful of is, depending on the type of construction, by that we mean whether it's concrete, wood, or steel, and also the occupancy, whether it's a restaurant, apartments, that type of thing. The building gets classified. The closer you get to a property line, the more restrictions there are for firewalls and that type of thing. Obviously for both sides of the property, for people on the other side as well as. So we need to watch for that. Recently, plans came in. It wouldn't have happened if we wouldn't have been here. They didn't show it. They weren't planning on doing it. It's one of those things that we caught. A very important one that I had not long ago was an applicant came in to put in remodel apartments in town, existing building, but they wanted to put the sleeping rooms on the interior of the building where there are no windows. A basic code that's been in there for decades is if you have a sleeping room, you need to have an exterior door or window as an opening so that in case of fire, and it needs to be big enough and close enough to the floor that a fireman with his full gear on can get through that opening and rescue or for people to get out. In this particular case, if we wouldn't have seen it, if there wouldn't have been a building permit, that would have happened. They would have had interior rooms. I'm trying to explain the purpose why we're here for a reason. There was one in town, it's been 2-3 years ago now, an out-of-town contractor. They had a header for an opening, 6 foot wide. Phil, you'll appreciate this. But the 2x4s, or the header he put in was literally 2x4s. And that was a disaster waiting to happen. I'm like, wait a minute. We got it corrected. Without inspections, that would have been overlooked. Probably one of the most important, the last thing I wanted to mention was a restaurant here in town. We had an out-of-state contractor, and it was pretty obvious he had no idea about kitchen hood systems, which are critical. You get a kitchen fire situation, you have to have the ducts designed a certain way, fire extinguishing systems, the whole thing. Again, there was wood in close proximity to this that could have easily turned into a fire, but we did get that taken care of. So my point is, we are here for a reason. The last thing I wanted to mention was our inspections. They're pretty common with all jurisdictions. The first one on there is a pre-permit site conditions inspection. We encourage this as much as possible. The reason for that is oftentimes we can actually save the owner's money. I've been out on situations where they've told me this is what we want to do, and I'm like, if you'll move that wall 1 foot, you can save yourself a lot of money with the firewall, and they're glad to hear that. So we do that, not on every job, but occasionally we'll do that. As the building goes up, we have our temporary electrical service, footings where we're checking for setbacks, concrete rebar placement prior to concrete pour. Building sewer, which is the sewer connection between the building and the property line, actually into the connection to our city line, to make sure that's done properly, proper bedding, proper material. Prior to pouring a slab for buildings, oftentimes we have plumbing and electrical that needs to be looked at, and radon for residential buildings. Then we get into our rough inspections, which is the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, framing. We look at masonry, fire ratings for vertical and horizontal assemblies, draft stopping to keep fire from spreading throughout a building. And then we get into the final inspections when the building is complete, the electrical, mechanical, plumbing, building. The last thing I just wanted to mention, a lot of our time as well goes into neighborhood disputes, drainage for the most part. Our neighbors are doing something with their property that's creating problems for us. We need to help resolve that as much as possible. So with that, turn it back
Thank
to
you.
What I wanted to do is give you some examples, and I used a $200,000 project as an example. And you have the structural aspect of it, and I put a value of that about $125,000. The permit fee for that would be about just under $900. Then you have the plumbing, and believe me, don't count on these numbers. They were just evened out to make the model work. So it's $318 for that, another $25,000 for mechanical, and then of course electrical, same number, same price. It gives you a total permit cost of about $1,800 and some change for a $200,000 project, or roughly 1%, just under 1%, to give you some example. Recently, we've had some projects. I kind of just did 3 to give you a sense of where we sit with our fees, which you do have in your package, to give you an idea of what 3 different projects were recently. As you can see, the convenience store that we recently did, we did the service for about $7,500. On the retail side, we did one for just a little over $4,000. And industrial lab was the big one there, and we did that for about $14,000. And as you can see, there's a big difference between our fees and area fees. And we used not only our comparable cities that we always use for everything else, but we also used our market area as well, because they're going to locate to eastern Iowa. We want them to consider Muscatine. So that's, these fees have been in place since 2005. So that's 13 years that we've had no adjustments in these fees. And just to give you some sense of that example, this is our performance in a very short summary of our performance over the last 4 years. And you'll see there was a dip in 2016 for a little bit of fees, number of inspections and such. You'll notice that that was the year we had a gap after, I'll say it quite straightforward, I had to fire somebody that was doing a poor job. And he didn't represent the city well. And that cost us 4 or 5 months before we replaced him. And we got someone really good. So it was for the right reason. But we lost a lot of inspections as a result, and therefore, but the fees were pretty much right in line with the other years, the previous 3 years. Then last year we had a spike. We've even had a spike since then, but I didn't put down 2018 because it's only 3 quarters done. But you can see the number of permits went up. About 100 of those permits were from storm damages from the tornado and hail last year, from March to June. So about 100 of those permits have to do with that. The fees were from larger projects that we were working with, not all from roofing, and roofing jobs weren't that expensive, so that wasn't the big number. We also punched up because we had that help. We also
Dave?
Yes.
Dave, one
Councilman
question.
Saucedo has a question.
One question. You mentioned earlier that for roofing, was there going to be a plan review for that or not?
No.
So there's no plan reviews for roof. Okay.
No. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to mention that we've beefed up our plan reviews, even though we're not getting paid for them. It saves so much time and energy on planning out the inspections. We found it beneficial just to do them. Doesn't mean we shouldn't do them for free. It's just that it means that we're doing them anyway. But we want to start charging for them. We'll come back at another date to talk about that. But that, in essence, is our overview of the building division under community development, and as to how it kind of works.
Dave, could you explain on this last slide, in fiscal year 16, you did 1,027 permits were granted and 855 inspections, but then the next year there was a tick up in 2017 on permits, but the inspections actually are more than what the permits are. And in all of the other cases, there were less inspections, more permits.
We had a lot of projects finishing that were getting towards their really critical stages in 2017 as well as 2018 to finishing up. I remember last year, roughly about this time or so, we spent a lot of time at H&I when they were putting in that overhead across the street and things like that. Also, we had an all-steel expansion, and there were a number of things happening down to Progress Park. Kent Corporation had a number of projects going, so we were finishing up a lot of projects that required more attention towards the end of their stages of development. We had the same thing happen this year. For example, the hotel and things like that. Those took a lot of energy, a lot of inspections to finish up those particular projects.
Thank you. Council, questions? Thank you, Dave.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you to all of you for enlightening us this evening. Council, do you have anything that you'd like to share? Councilman Harvey?
I do have one question, back on the sidewalk courtesy walk thing. You mentioned that, for instance, the existing courtesy walks will not be renewed, and you made a comment that might be a policy versus a code.
We'll have to bring back corrections.
Yeah, I was gonna say-
Or an update to the sidewalk policy. What I'll probably suggest that we do is take a look at it since it's been at least 3 years or so. Take a quick look through there and see if there's any other recommended changes. Bring that back for council review and
Okay,
consideration. But at this point in time, based on your consensus, we'll move forward as directed and then bring back a revised policy.
Since Andrew is redoing some of the code, would this be something that he could just incorporate with some of his rewrites?
Well,
It's not a code.
it's not a code. It's simply.
No, but I mean, it should be a code. Or, I mean, being a policy, to me, as Jim kind of implied, then it's kind of a matter of a judgment. In this
You can
case,
certainly
maybe
you can certainly take a look at it. I mean, it provides guidance on issues that aren't maybe typically code related. There may be some items to pull out of the policy and insert into code. Not necessarily, because it does talk, for example, about our inspection process. You know, ideally we'd like to get to, I believe it was a 5-year inspection process, like we've done historically with nuisance in the past. We'd like to get back to doing that as well. But, you know, trying to find staffing to do that or whatever it may be. And we haven't been able to implement all those things.
Code or policy, it's just that
right.
Apparently it was kind of buried where even, you know,
yep.
Jim
we worked with Bi-State on developing the policy, and I'm assuming it's probably a combination of multiple policies that were put together at the time. And so I'd suggest we take a look at it, review it, see where we can. There may be other things to look at and review as well, and recommendations bring back for council review. And if there's appropriate items to put into city code, we could certainly do that at the time.
That's all I had.
That's all you have? Thank you. Councilman Spread?
Nothing at this time.
Councilman Fitzgerald?
Nothing at this time.
Councilman Malcolm?
Nothing at this time, Your Honor.
Councilwoman Brockert?
On Saturday, I plan to go back into the ditch on Grandview between Mr. Sippy's and the intersection of Sampson and Hauser and pick up trash. So if anyone would like to join me, you're more than welcome to. I would really like that if you would show up dressed in long pants, sturdy shoes, long sleeve shirts, and have gloves. I will have garbage bags available, but please, please, please wear gloves. And if it's raining lightly, I'll still go, but you know, if it's downpouring, we'll save it for another day.
Thank you.
I have one question in regards to the presentation and the permits. It can be Mr. Boak or Mr. Stensland. In the review of the 37 years that you mentioned that we had been providing permits and codes from your history, is there ever a metric or a procedure or a way to get feedback, since we're providing a service to our customers, as how we can improve or things that we can provide better versus just coming in and doing an inspection?
I can only answer it this way. I don't recall that there was any formal survey sent out. I know there has been repeated attempts. Part of that involves you folks when you do code adoptions, when you do ordinance changes, when you do all the other things where you have public hearings, you have different opportunities for people to come in and address those.
But not so much particularly as a public input. I'm saying as if you provided a service for a roof inspection or a plumbing inspection, and And then, hey, by the way, here's my card, you know, drop this off if you want to give a survey or give me information back to let me know that we truly have provided a service, is what I'm trying to get at. Has that ever been something done in the 37 years of your history?
I don't recall that ever having being done. I won't tell you it hasn't
and that's
been,
fine,
but
and that's fine. I'm
don't
just saying that
recall.
that's something that
I
we
do
can
know that
look
we've
at.
had different instances where we've left tags, you know, hanging on the doors and those kinds of things to try to get, you know, an exchange with folks. But if you're talking about a kind of a quality survey or quality of service survey, I can't answer that that's actually ever been done. I don't recall that.
Okay, that's
Thank
all
you.
I have. Thank you. And my only other item is a reminder, April 23rd to the 27th is Keeping Beautiful Clean, spring cleanup. So make sure that we continue to do that, to not try to put trash out too early. But to just remind folks that that is something that we at the council are very proud of, to be able to continue to provide a service for our community.
Councilman Brackett?
Oh, just yet another reminder about the Soapbox Derby on the 4th of July. And also let people know that we are looking for pictures from past years, whether it's the past 2 years or previous years. I'd like to have you reach out to the Derby on the Facebook page, just Muscatine Soapbox Derby on Facebook, or Muscatine Soapbox Derby at gmail.com. And we can get those pictures put up online for people to enjoy. Thank you.
I have one of my dad in 1968.
Perfect.
Staff, anything?
Just one item. I'd like to congratulate Merrill Hotel on their grand opening, ribbon cutting today. A beautiful day in Muscatine, and a great new addition to downtown Muscatine.
And I just have a few things. I would like to thank the Davenport Community School Districts and the Boy Scouts for the Quad City Leadership and Poverty Summit that we attended at the John Deere headquarters in Moline this past Saturday. We brought together a lot of youth, and they came up with some very encouraging ideas on how to deal with poverty, presented it to all of us area mayors, and had some really good insight. It was a great day. Secondly, our next Coffee with the Mayor is April 28th at Happy Joe's at 9 a.m. Love to see you come. And next, I'd like to share that on Tuesday is going to be our very first episode of Our City. We are going to be highlighting the Spring Cleanup Week, which is April 23rd through the 27th. And we're going to have Christy Corpy and Randy Howell come and talk to us, because it's actually two departments do this together, and it is a wonderful service to our community. Folks always have a lot of questions, so I think it will be some really good information to share. Next, I'd like to remind everyone that on April 25th, we have the Youth Job Fair that we're doing at the high school from 4 to 6 in the Commons area. Please bring your youth or send your youth and have them hook up with one of the many employers that'll be there. They're looking for summer help, and get the kids some summer jobs and give them something to do and earn some of those much needed job skills that they'll use throughout their life. Lastly, I'd like to remind folks that now is the time, if you have spring leaf pickup that you'd like to have done. I get calls quite a bit from people that still have leaves left over from the fall, or are raking now. And if you call between now and April 20th, Public Works at 2638933, you can schedule a time and they'll come pick up those leaves for you at no charge. So that's all we have. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Thank you. Good evening.